Welcome to the Outer Realm with Michelle Desrochers and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to the Outer Realm. This is our, technically we're live on the United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network 105.3 from the Gulf Coast, 107.7 FM from beautiful New Orleans. We are this is a pre-record for tonight's show. So for those of you just tuning in, there will not be a chat room tonight, but for our subscribers on Rumble and our YouTube, we are live, so you get to participate if you happen to be watching. I did advertise this last night for those of you who could make it. So hopefully we'll see that. Otherwise, I will be hanging in the chat room with you guys tonight. That's right. So you get the pleasure of my company. Anyway, big thank you to Folgers Coffee, who have been a part of our journey since day one. We appreciate you so very much. Big thank you to Justice Snicker, aka Dr. Snick, the Sonic Surgeon, for his contribution of his voice, his music, and his time for the intro that you just heard. He is an award-winning composer of Halloween, horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music. Perfect for October. So you have to check him out. He's got a lot of great stuff to listen to, especially to put you all in the mood for the season. Anyway, also big thank you to Steve McGinnis, the artist behind the banners and logos here at the show. Check him out on Instagram and Facebook. Does great commission pieces, even though he technically specializes in the horror genre as well. So tonight's going to be a lot. Well, I mean, it's going to be fun for me because I can experience it right now. But we're bringing back a personal friend and favorite, Mark Olly, and you guys know him. He's pretty much a frequent flyer here on the show, and we always get into a lot of really deep stuff. And today's not going to be any different. We're going to be talking about the mysteries of ancient Egypt with a few surprises that he likes to toss in there and leaves us all going, what the hell did he just say? So anyway, without further ado, my friend and our special guest, Mark Olly. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
At this point, everybody goes, where's his beard gone?
I was going to say like the beard of knowledge, but it's gone.
No, it's disappeared. No. I was feeling like I was looking about 200 years old, and now at least only look about 100 years old, So there you go.
You look great. Definitely threw me for a bit of a loop there. First I went, all right. Yeah. So, but thank you so much for returning. This is the only segment that we're doing that isn't going to have some kind of a spooky undertone for October, but I like it because it's full of mysteries. And of course, I love to stick to the historical aspect of thing. It really is like one of my first loves is the history of everything that is pretty much out there and unnatural, things that we would not expect. And you just seem to be loaded with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it just keeps coming. Just keeps coming.
I know. Wow. Okay. So you threw a few zingers at me in the last show, and I actually put some of that information off to some producers I'm working with, moving forward with a big TV project, and everybody was kind of like, what? She's like, no, we got to use this guy. It's great.
Well, it can't be that bad because I'm back for round 2. Here we go.
I know, but it's fantastic. I can't wait to see what you have in store for us. So the mysteries of ancient Egypt includes so many different things. I mean, you're looking into stuff that you can even incorporate into modern times, like, the Coptic Church, for example. We talked a little bit about the Celts coming to Egypt. We left off pretty much at that point. So where do you feel you want to start with this part of everything? And we'll just go with the flow because it's just so much information.
Well, I think I covered the Celtic involvement. I think I mentioned, did I mention the DNA for Akhenaten and his family?
Yeah, you did touch on that. And I think that's why we thought it would be a good segue into this show. So,
there we go.
Akhenaten was controversial to start with, but
absolutely. I think I said in the last episode.
Yes.
I mean, there's only one thing worse than having two pharaohs or two leaders that have got different religious views. There's only one thing worse than that. That's having two leaders with exactly the same view. And that's, I think, what you found when you deal with sort of Moses and Akhenaten. Akhenaten is sort of built on concepts that were there in ancient Egypt, but reduced down to him just worshipping the Aten. And then in my time scale, I think Moses was in Akhenaten's reign, or certainly in the reign of his family, and he comes along and he's got the whole sort of Hebrew, which is now the Judaic-Christian concept of what a god is. But again, he's a monotheist, the same as Akhenaten. So the whole of that sort of Old Testament, Moses, let my people go, and all that sort of, all that episode, it's all sort of, my God is bigger than your God. That really is what those stories are all about. And of course, biblically, it's the God of Moses that wins. But I think I said in the last one as well, that really in that particular epoch, you need to be aware that most of what you're reading, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, are said to have been written by Moses, and certainly the material in there is essentially Egyptian. So, if you suddenly put your Christian head on and go and read that, it's going to come out like a Sunday school story. But that's not what that's all about. It's absolutely dripping with Egyptian references, iconography, background information, because that's where Moses is coming from, literally, physically.
You see, you're throwing me for a loop right there, because we've all been told or taught that Moses was in and around the time of Ramses, who came after.
Well, you've got
Ramses II, that is.
You've got a couple of problems there. I mean, having been to Egypt, I've seen this physically. I mean, if you go to have a look at the hieroglyphs of the pharaoh lists and things like that,
yes,
you've got 2 alternatives really. Some of them have got pharaohs that have literally been chiseled off. They're just not there.
Well,
so
they wiped themselves out, right? Their predecessors off.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the famous ones is Hatshepsut, the female. She was, got rid of because they weren't happy with that. So she disappears from some of them. But there are many others that do that. Then you've also got the other thing where they rewrite them. So you're looking at these ancient texts and there are huge chunks of things missing that we know as archaeologists exist elsewhere. So, you'll have 2 pharaohs next to each other, and we know that, 20 miles down the road, there's another list that's got 3 pharaohs in that gap, and things like that. So I think the best way of reorganizing that, there was a writer called David Roll, absolutely brilliant, superb writer that went out there, really went into it in a big way and produced a book called A Test of Time. And when you have a look at what he's saying in A Test of Time, that I think is getting closer to the real date line and pharaoh line. And then you've got to jump back into the Old Testament and have a look at what's going on chronologically there in the light of new linguistic and archaeological discoveries. It's not difficult to line the 2 of them up and say it's probably more likely that it was the Akhenaten dynasty that was around at the time of Moses. I'll give you a really good example, because I found this earlier on. Many moons ago, I used to do talks in schools, and I just produced a very quick list of gods that appear in the various plagues. So let's have a look at those. So you've got things like, I think I mentioned this last time, I can be more specific this time. When you've got things like the Nile turning to blood, well, that's Moses humiliating one of the gods, because the Nile represents one of the Egyptian gods. So it's Osiris.
Mhm.
You end up with a plague of frogs. That god is Hecht. Gnats is a god called Seb. Flies is a god called Hatcock. Cow blight is, of course, the Apis bulls, so that kills some of them off. Funnily enough, in the list of Apis bulls, there's about 4 years missing, and it sits in the Akhenaten dynasty. So again, it's pointing towards that. Then you got Boils, which was Typhon, the god of medicine. Hail and fire, which is Shua, the god of fire. I mean, fire gets out of control in the ancient world. It's so destructive. You know, we control it now quite adequately, but back then it could rip through a town and take the entire town out and everything in it. Locusts. I've got a great story. I was in Cairo, and they had a plague of locusts. And I'll tell you, unless you've been there, you've got no idea. How bad.
Yeah.
Oh, you know
It's
they're like.
bad. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
bad.
sky goes black. It sounds like somebody's rattling 1,000 tins of ball bearings.
Right.
These things were eating the rubber tires off cars. You know, people don't.
Hardcore locusts.
Oh, they were big fellas. You can't imagine what it's like unless
Oh.
you've been in one of those. But of course,
God.
that's the god of that is Sarada. Then you got 3 days of darkness. So, you know, Moses' God just basically switches Ra off, you know,
Right.
turns him off. And then you've got the death of the firstborn, which really rounds it all up and humiliates all of the gods. That list of gods, archaeologically, is known to come together in that form in around about the time of the Akhenaten dynasty. So as soon as you start looking at, you know, Moses and the plagues, you
It
sat
makes sense.
in. Yeah, you sat in that time period, you know.
Mm.
That's just one example of many.
Why
Like,
do you
for
think they
example,
would have bumped it? Like, why do you think they would have altered it so much? Do you think it's just misinterpretation?
well, the Victorians go back a bit further, maybe to Napoleon's troops in the early 1800s. You know, so you've got the French, the early translators, the Victorians, the early archaeologists. They're all, you know, trying to get a chronology of some kind, which is, you know, what archaeologists do. It's what we do. The only trouble is they didn't have as much information available to them as we have now. And David Roll's book was, you know, it was miles overdue. He's all he's done is corrected inconsistencies in previous research material. You know, he's altered that. So yeah, I'm, you know, fairly convinced that that's where the two of them sit. I wonder if I've got a date for. Let me have a quick date for Akhenaten. I should have a date. I should know this. I'm kind of thinking it was about 1360-ish BC, I think. But I'm cheating today. Because I remember to find me notes.
That's okay. Well, that's okay. Yeah.
I don't usually do that. So
I use notes.
Yeah, it's 18th dynasty.
Right. Okay.
Which I wasn't far off. Where is he? Oh, I can't find it. There we go. Akhenaten. Yeah, he's 1379 to 1362. I was 2 years out. That's not bad from memory.
Not bad.
Give or take, you know, a few years either way. That's kind of when he was. Which,
Right.
funnily enough, most people think Moses was around 1320-ish to, you know, 60-ish. So give or take, again, the same kind of discrepancy. You're in the same period. Certainly, to me, it makes more sense to put them in the same, you know, time frame because of the evidence I'm seeing. I mean, Akhenaten wrote a lot of hymns as well. He wrote a lot of hymns to the Arten, and some of those hymns have found the way straight across into Psalms in the Bible. So
Interesting.
clearly that material has moved over, but there's not really a lot of material there that you can definitely say was down to the Ramesses era. I think most people jump on Ramses because he was there so long. You know, he had an enormously long reign.
Yeah, if a guy was there forever, then everything happened during his reign. So logic will tell you.
Easy target, yeah, easy target.
Yes. So of course, we talked about the Celts and everything in the last show, so we'll move forward. But there is a lot of mystery even surrounding, like, the death of Akhenaten and what happened to Nefertiti. They're still looking for her.
They still are, yeah. You've got this mysterious possible extra doorway. Is it or isn't it? You know, in the tomb of Tutankhamun, they've you know, done not X-rays, but topographical scans of the walls, and you can definitely see the outline of something. And
Yes.
there's no doubt that in terms of a regular layout for a tomb, his tomb is irregular. It's
It
wrong.
is. It is.
It's laid out incorrectly. So there should be something else. There
Yes.
definitely should be. I've followed that eagle-eyed in the hope that the main burial, if you like, is still in there, and that's like you say, Nefertiti. But who knows? I mean, they've looked at a lot of mummies of different queens from that dynasty, and there's a possibility that they're very close. They could even have the remains and not realize it at this point.
Well, Nefertari they never found, and she came
No.
afterwards. Like there's some queens that are just, where the heck did she go? There's another mystery. Apparently one of Egypt's most beloved queens is just instrumental. Nobody knows really what happened to her or where she ended up.
I think
Wife number one.
With Egypt, the thing was that if there was any threat to a tomb or to the body of a particular monarch who was still supported in the public consciousness, then they felt duty bound to remove those physical remains to somewhere else. So even if you walk into, the tomb of Nefertiti, there's no guarantee that she'll still be there, because she might have been moved in antiquity, for safekeeping elsewhere. So Egypt is as complicated as it is, enormous, technologically advanced and mysterious. It's got so many facets to it. Nothing is ever straightforward. It was brilliant how they stumbled on the DNA, though, when they did the test for all of the remains they had that thought were connected to Tutankhamun and to Akhenaten, because they've got Akhenaten and his queen, and they've got the children and this, that, and the other. And it was just great how Zahi tried to make it so that none of the DNA results were ever released. And they did this documentary, and it ended up coming up on the screen in HD on a laptop in the lab. So the guys in Sweden looked at it and went, "Oh, hey, yeah, we've got it now," and it turned out 96.4% British. So
wow.
Might explain when the dynasty collapsed why his daughter Mary Tartan decided she was going to sort of hop round the Mediterranean until eventually she came out of the Pillars of Hercules and ended up settling in Southern Ireland. Because if that's where their DNA originates, they must have had some awareness of, where the rest of them were, as it were.
Well, I mean, the founder of Scotland, as they say, as well, right?
Scotia, who is Mary Tartan. Brilliant book, Kingdom of the Ark. I mentioned it last time.
Oh, I bought it. Whenever you recommend a book, I go out and buy it, because yes. So it has all of that information in there.
It does. Yeah.
So
Foundation Legend of Scotland. Also, incidentally, my foundation story as well. That's where my family comes from. We're all part of that process. I've got 65% matching DNA to Tutankhamun and Akhenaten, so I'm quite chuffed with that.
I guess so. I guess so. Why not? So another mystery, of course, is Tutankhamun and how he passed away. Like, there's a lot of stuff that is unresolved in there before we get into even, everything else, like Dead Sea Scrolls and the Ancient Library of Egypt and all that, just while we're on the topic before we get too far ahead of ourselves. It is also a mystery.
Well, it looks like Akhenaten might have died, I believe I'm right in saying, might have died a natural death. The children he produced genetically were a little bit dodgy because the whole family intermarried, which I think has
which is normal back then, right?
Well, I think it also has a lot to do with the fact they had these elongated heads. They had the huge craniums, which in the case of that particular family is genetic.
Right.
They're not artificial, like everybody claims. That's genetic. So they're trying to keep that particular line pure. They want all the kids basically to turn out the same. And obviously, three or four generations down the line, that's it. They've had it. The whole thing's going to come crashing down because that's how DNA works. Sure enough, I think it's next generation or two generations down, it's really starting to affect Tutankhamun, and he's then going to marry one of his sisters. So you can imagine, the two babies that are buried with him in his tomb are just a genetic disaster.
Yes.
You know, that they died because they were supposed to, of natural causes. Akhenaten, most people now, Tutankhamun, sorry, most people are leaning more towards some kind of an accident, because a lot of the evidence that early on was thought to be signs of murder or whatever doesn't quite fit. Like the bone fragments in his skull, they think was a result of them going through his nose to remove the brain at mummification. So it's things like that that have been looked at in greater detail. But he also was a bit of a genetic disaster. Things were not right in his physiology. It might be something just as simple as, you know, he fell off a chariot. Boom, end of story, you know.
Yeah, something that simple. But he had ailments too, right? Like he had a club foot. He was a mess.
Yeah, and it looks like the burial was done in such a rush that the death was more than likely not anticipated. It was accidental.
Right.
So a lot of the burials that have resulted from war, clearly they've been anticipated to some extent, and the ones that we think resulted from assassination don't have the same kind of grave goods or veneration or support that Tutankhamun got when he was buried. But a lot of Tutankhamun stuff looks like it came from elsewhere.
Well, but he didn't rule long enough to accumulate anything like that.
Not really.
I mean, you can only have imagined, you know, what Ramses would have looked like, who ironically was put right in front of Tutankhamun's tomb, and he got ransacked, and you know, and then everything from dirt filled up to the ceiling, and then they find him, Tutankhamun, behind there. So, you know, that's interesting. But I like this comment that Tamara says, and I know of this because, well, first off, I own pieces from the old Niagara Falls Museum of Oddities, which was around the 1800s. But I filmed. The person who bought it with partners was a man called Billy Jameson, and I filmed and met Billy Jameson. I've seen whatever mummies he had left, and I've seen the collection. And I don't know, you probably you can't see it. I've got a peacock behind me that's from the 1800s, a taxidermy that came from that museum as well. I've got a few pieces, but what was interesting is that when he said, you know, we didn't realize we had a royal mummy at the time, because they had 8 mummies that were brought over in Victorian times and put in this museum at the big tourist place of Niagara Falls, Canada. And it was fascinating to me. And, you know, they were sold to a museum, I believe it was in Atlanta. And Atlanta contacted Dr. Zai Hawass and said, we think we've got a royal mummy. And he went home, the first mummy ever to be issued a passport and a royal procession. So it was really fascinating.
We've got a few here in Liverpool, and then a few more in Manchester. So there are a few over here. I think
everywhere.
I think we know what we've got. I think they're fairly well established, the ones we've got over here. I think there's a couple of temple servants and a couple of other lesser nobles. Yeah,
because I think Egypt has asked for the royal mummies. Because again, Akhenaten, nobody knows where Akhenaten really is, do they? Like, he wasn't liked very much. So
no, so chances are he's been obliterated. Most of his temples were obliterated.
Yes,
I think the idea was that his son Tutankhamun was going to take everything back to the old, you know, polytheistic way of doing things, with all the old gods coming back and goddesses coming back, etc. How successful that was, nobody will ever know, because obviously he died before he could bring it back in. Eventually, Egypt did drift back into that, and all the old temples and the strong religious organization all rose back up again. And Akhenaten's vision of monotheism disappeared. And the only bit that was left actually was whatever was left in the Bible as traces of monotheism, which is the Mosaic form, you know.
So let's go back to that then.
Okay.
All right. So you had experiences yourself in Egypt, and you want to talk a little bit about that before we get into some more of the techie stuff?
Oh, can do.
Okay.
Gosh, I don't even know where to start. When I went to Egypt, it was interesting because it was back in 2005, so it's before the uprising, the sort of Arab dawn or Islamic dawn, or whatever they want to call it, where they changed the whole country.
Yeah, I was in after you. Yeah,
that was after I was there. So it was interesting because it had just begun when I was there. So there was about I don't know, 60 tourists or something machine gunned at Hatshepsut's temple about 3 or 4 days before we got to it. So it was quite edgy. It was proper, Raiders of the Lost Ark type adventure. We couldn't go into the desert one day because it was something like 130 degrees out there, and you couldn't do it or you'd drop dead. Everyone was traveling in convoys, so you'd have like a tank and a couple of buses and then another tank.
It was different times.
Wild. It was wild in 2005, but it was good from my point of view because all the principal sites, what we did was we started right up with Philae Temple of Isis, right up at the top end, and worked our way down the Nile sites. We'd aimed to try to get to 13 different sites, and there was a spiritual leader on board. I was on board doing the archaeology from this side because it was a UK tour, and then we had a couple of guys over there. A guy called Fagani, and we had another lady from the Antiquities department that was doing the touring out there. But Fagani was amazing. He was the last of the family that used to look after the Giza Plateau and had looked after the Giza Plateau for about 160 years. So basically he could overrule everybody. Literally we managed to get an hour with the whole of the Great Pyramid of Giza cleared out, with all the lights turned off, just so that we could play some music in there to see what would happen. That's out of the question nowadays. Nobody could possibly do that now. Also, he managed to make it so one night all the guards disappeared and we could get to the top of the pyramid, which again you're not allowed to do now. It's a total no-no. You just
I did
climb.
it in the middle of the day, and I stood next to the sign that said "Don't climb the pyramid."
Well, I'm sure people still do that now, but
I think if you tip the guard, tip them right, they'll let you have 2 minutes next to the sign.
Fagani was kind of officially, but unofficially doing this. He just rode across. But the house he lived in faced the Sphinx. He was like 2 doors up from the Giza McDonald's. That's weird as well. I've never seen a McDonald's where you've got like a car and a car and a car and then a camel and a camel and a camel all parked up at the front. It's just whoa.
That's interesting.
Very juxtaposition kind of thing. But yeah, we did all the main sites. We did Komombo, we did Luxor, we did the Giza Plateau, Valley of the Kings. I'm trying to think what else we did. Bent Pyramid at Dashur. We basically did it all. So it was whistle stop. I think it was about 10 days or 12 days. And we had these 13 sites we wanted to hit. So we were hitting 2 or 3 a day. Valley of the Kings was very touchy. We were the last bus out of the valley as the sun was hitting the horizon. And we were told we had to be out before it went dark because of what the terrorists were doing. And, they were grabbing hostages and shooting at buses and things like that. We were literally, we were guided out by a tank. Crazy. So you can imagine there's a bus and in front of it is a tank. And it wasn't a case of, can we have a few more minutes for souvenirs? It was like, you are leaving now. You've got till the other half of the sun disappears and then that's it. We can't help you anymore. So it was just amazing experience. If anybody wants to go, I'd encourage them to go. I drank of the water of the Nile, so at some point I'm going back before I die, according to legend. It's all these little things that you pick up. You got to be there.
I've seen the Nile. I was on the Nile. I was like, oh, it's bad. It was bad. It is. It's like
it's an
camels have been bathing in it back then, right?
Well, that's the other side of it as well. 3 days after you drink any of the water, you end up with the not to mentions. And the cure for that is Turkish coffee with a hefty shot of lemon in it. I'll clear it up in about 24 hours. And some big white pills.
I got back to. I had watermelon that was grown along the Nile, and by the time I went back to Paris from there, like within literally 2 days after, I was freaking dying. That's all I'm going to say. I'll leave it.
Well, everybody was told not to drink the water on the Nile cruises, and they're all took
watermelon. I didn't want to be
into the salad. Oh, what do you think they tossed the salad in? You know what I mean? It's tossed in water,
it was bad.
Took it into. And the other thing as well is always wash your hands after handling the money, because you pay when you use the loo.
This is true. I think people fail to realize is that Egypt itself, at least back when I was there was like 52 million people. And
Yeah.
Egypt is not a big country. And Cairo probably had 9 million of those people.
Well, when
Like,
I was there, I think you might have your figures wrong. When I was
okay,
there, I was told there was 32 million people
just in Cairo.
in Cairo,
Okay, so then
and,
yeah,
and
maybe 52 in Egypt. Yeah,
they anticipated it
sure.
growing to 36 million by the next year,
Yeah,
and that was
because I was there.
in 2005.
Yeah, I was there in 2008, and
Oh
that's the
yeah,
numbers we
well
were
yeah,
being given. That was just brutal. But
yeah.
so pyramids, yeah, a lot of people go in there to be, part of the whole pyramid power thing, and they've just found other chambers in there. I'm trying to think of the new technology that they used just recently, and they found another chamber.
Yeah, it was some kind of penetrating radar, because I have
It
been
is
following
from
that.
neurons or something like
Yeah.
that, isn't it? Like something really crazy, and they found some because it can penetrate through stone.
Well, it's the other way around. It goes through the stone and picks up where there isn't any stone. So what they're doing is they're looking for voids.
Yes.
And then the computer then jumbles the data, and it can tell you what shape those voids are. So it's an absence of something that they're looking for. And sure enough, there's a couple of minor bits and bobs, and then a socking great big void sort of up and to one side of where they'd expect to find one. It's next to the King's Chamber in there. What it is, very, very hard to tell, incredibly difficult to tell.
And how do you even get to it? At this stage, everything is just so blocked
up. You can't destroy something. You've just got to try and work out, how they backed out and try and reverse that process. But if it was created when they actually put the structure up, then you're talking about cameras, little tiny cameras going in through drill holes and things like that. It's the only way they're going to get inside it.
So I have to ask next. I think at this point we know that at least the Great Pyramid was not a burial chamber, and I've definitely read research based on the fact that some of the mystery schools were operated within the pyramids, probably for frequency, and because we can get into Jesus and his connection to Egypt, because one of those articles kind of stated that he was taught within. It was a bit of an energy center built about 17 years ago.
As a kind of as a bridge from where we were to where we're going, it was interesting when we managed to get the blackout in the pyramid, because what we tried to do was just, obviously bring acoustic instruments. So we had a few stringed instruments, a couple of guitars, what have you, but then we also had a sistrum, one of these bells on poles, and a couple of tambourines and frame drums and what have you. And we sat in there for quite a while. What we were trying to do was record it to see what kind of effects it would have. Now, from my point of view, I'm sat in there, I'm tapping away on a drum, lights go out, you sat there in the dark. Next minute, it was like I was sat in space. And the only thing that I could definitely tell you was there was the little bit of hard ground that I was sat on. Everything else just vanished. It just went infinite. And apparently everybody else experienced that feeling as well, of being sat in infinity. And the sound we were creating, of course, was going up through the roof of the King's Chamber into the other chambers which are up there that are known to be, built as part of the structure, because it has a sloping, weight-relieving structure above it, but they've all got voids. And those voids seem to amplify everything and create this effect that you were actually floating in eternity. Now, if that wasn't mysterious enough, we took in a battery-operated cassette player, so recording to tape. There was a couple of early mobile phones in there, which obviously record. And then there were two of these digital dictaphone machines. When we got out of the structure, obviously we're all like, oh, what have we got? What have we got? None of the batteries had any power. They'd all gone out. All of the devices, all of them had failed, mobile phones including. So that's an actual testimonial that there is something going on in that structure. And trying to record anything in there, I mean, how anybody gets a photograph or video footage, I've got no idea. But when you try to record audio, we had this experience where every device we had, whether it was tape, whether it was on microchip, whether it was, loading to something else, they all died. All the devices just went out. No power. They were fine when they got charged back up, but they've got new batteries, but gone.
Hmm.
So back to mystery schools. A few of the folks also climbed into that sarcophagus
I did that.
and lay in there and had different experiences.
Mhm.
I didn't, for my sins. The thing I was
I
focusing on
didn't
was
either. Well, I mean, I didn't
no.
get an experience laying in there.
Well, I didn't get in there, but the thing I was
Okay.
focusing on was, the shaft
Mhm.
that points towards Sirius,
Mhm.
the pole star for the
Mhm.
Egyptians.
Yes.
I was fascinated by that shaft, and I just had a moment right at the very end of it all because I was a guide. I was able to hang back a bit, and I was the last person to leave the king's chamber. So everybody else had cleared off. You could see them disappearing down the big corridor, and I just spent a few minutes with that shaft, and had this enormous sense that it kind of went somewhere beyond us, beyond our dimension. And there
Mhm.
was almost a sense that something was coming back down it, like it
Mhm.
wasn't one way. It was
Mhm.
built for some form of communication, and
Mhm.
that feeds into the idea that mystery schools might have actually met in there for
Mhm.
communication purposes rather than death and burial.
Well, there were so many pyramids in Egypt
Yeah.
because they never specified where they believed even Jesus had studied as
Mm.
part of all of that. Because I think what you've talked about, even in past interviews, talking about his uncle Joseph of Arimathea,
Mm.
who took him everywhere as a young man, being a man of wealth as well, and being the
Yeah.
Essenes, and they went in and they really traveled around and educated themselves everywhere, and even the scriptures will tell you there was some missing time, like where was Jesus all these years? Well, probably here, traveling about and being educated. But I like the theory because nobody really knows, well, how was the Great Pyramid built. And I believe that from some of the things I've been finding, that perhaps the Great Pyramid was an energy center built about 17,000 years ago by Thoth through technologies that he had
Well,
from Atlantis and Lemuria. So what are
you've
your
got
thoughts on
you've
that?
got the idea that the Sphinx, which is very clearly water worn, predates the
Yes.
flood and pointed to the horizon in, was it 10,900 BC, round
Mhm.
about that period.
Mhm.
So they've been there a tremendously long time.
Mhm.
We forget that when the Greeks arrived in Egypt, the pyramids were thousands of years old. Even then, there's a Greek account of it's probably Herodotus or something like that. One of the Greeks wrote an account and said that they were amazed by these quote tourist attractions
Mhm.
that at that point, of course, was still current. They hadn't even had Cleopatra at that point.
Mhm.
That you're still back in before the Ptolemaic dynasties when you go
Yeah.
back to the Greeks, Alexander the Great and all that.
Mhm.
You know, so they've been tourist attractions for years. Going back slightly though to what you were saying about Jesus and the mystery schools,
Mhm.
when I was out in Egypt, I learned very quickly that there's the Coptic Church is very early, founded
Okay.
by the Apostle Mark in around 60 AD. And if
Mhm.
you want to know whether someone's Coptic or not, on the back of the wrist they have a tiny little black cross, or they might have saints tattooed on their arms, so you can identify Copts fairly quickly.
Mhm.
And I met a really nice guy on one of the Nile cruise boats. He was working in one of the souvenir shops, and I spotted what was on the back of his hand. So I sat down, had a long chat with him, and his first opening response was, "Oh yeah, we know exactly where Jesus went. We know exactly what he did when he was here. We know exactly which temples he was trained in. We know where the family lived, and oh yes, there's a church next to the Muhammad Ali Mosque in Cairo where they resided. You can go go down into the basement and visit it, which I did.
Mhm.
And there's actually a guidebook produced by the Copts out there, and it tells you all the villages. They know exactly where he went and what he did.
Mhm.
And I've studied that, and I've had a look at that, and it makes perfect sense. So here I'm going to get a plug in here, because the book I'm writing at the moment, all about the biblical stuff, I'm going to try and get as much of that missing information in as I possibly can, because it does fill in a gap and it makes a lot of sense.
Well, I like it because you include the chronology and the
Yeah,
dates of everything. You fill in the blanks with dates so people could cross-reference it, which is what I
absolutely.
love.
Yeah, that's
I
kind of
love
what I
it.
do. So a polychronicon, it's going to be another one of those, isn't it? I did it for Robin Hood, and I've done it for King Arthur. I may as well do it for Jesus and Christianity as well. Why not? You know, it's going to be one of those. So I'm kind of working on that at the moment. But the information's out there. You know, I know it's not what you would call orthodox. You know, it's not like the Eastern Orthodox Church or the, you know, the Western.
You
Orthodox
spent 3
Church.
years being educated in biblical studies, right?
Yes.
So I mean,
Yeah.
you're basically, you know, certified up to the eyeballs to be able to do this. So, you know, I'll take your word for it because
nothing beats being there either. I mean, you know, if somebody says to me, "Oh, you need to, you know, look into whatever," I'll literally go there, go and have a look, you know, and talk to the people on the ground because at the end of the day, they know, you know, they'll show you things and tell you things that maybe have never even made it into books, you know, that you just don't know. I mean, some of the stories about, you know, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Library and stuff like that, trust me, that's the tip of the iceberg, you know, compared to what's turned up over the years. I mean, I only found out the other day, I speculated, this was interesting because I speculated, I said, well, some of the things the Knights Templar did, they look an awful lot like some of the lost Gospels, you know, the things that don't appear in the Bible, like the bits that are, quote, lost or apocrypha or, you know, whatever. What they're actually doing seems to match a different kind of theology. And I'm thinking, I wonder where that came from. Anyway, fast forward, I'm going through a book about the Dead Sea Scrolls and somebody just happens to mention, oh, you know what? There's been people pulling scrolls out of those caves for hundreds of years, which is exactly what I said. And apparently the first discoveries were made by the Romans. So you're going back a hell of a long way. So the whole idea that all this material disappeared and it was lost and, oh, nobody knew about it, nobody could read it. Nonsense, absolute nonsense. Because right up to, you know, like medieval times, they could read Latin. You know, the Sufis could read Arabic. There was still people out there that could read Hebrew. You know, it doesn't matter what scroll you pull out of a cave. Somebody somewhere is going to be able to read it.
Aramaic was a big one.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Hebrews continue to read Aramaic, even hieroglyphs, you know, right up to sort of 500, 600 AD. So the idea then that, you know, along come the Templars and drop themselves into that world, of course they're going to have access to material that now we've lost because it's a process of decay. Yes, we keep finding more of it, but it's vanishing quicker than we're finding it. You know, so absolutely. I can't wait to get stuck in and start putting some of this material out.
No kidding. Wow. I want to make a quick comment because we have about 66 people over on Rumble who are currently watching. You may not realize, but if you guys comment, it will come up here on the soundboard and we can put your comments up for, you know, if you have questions, things like that. So please feel free to participate if you're feeling so inclined. Brave soul. No, we appreciate you guys all. So thank you. The chat room just totally rocks it. I love doing the afternoon ones and opening up to our followers. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, Tamara says, apparently there may still be some buried, which is a belief system, right?
Well, I was going to say it's not there may be some still buried. It's more likely that there are still buried because you've got to be careful on your definition of what is a Dead Sea Scroll because the scrolls turning up all over the place. They don't just turn up at Qumran. There are scrolls that are lumped in with the Dead Sea Scrolls that come from caves that are up to 2 or 3 miles away from Qumran, and they're still lumped in. But then there are other libraries as well that are turning up. And one of the biggest shockers I had, again, this is all brand new recent stuff, biggest shockers I have, they've just got 10,500 1,000-year-old scrolls walled up in one of the temples in Tibet. And apparently these scrolls go back to, quote, the beginning of time. What on earth's in that? And then when I was in Morocco, so you're talking North Africa here, there are people fleeing out of troubles in Africa. Okay, so they're fleeing north out of sub-Saharan Africa into North Africa, bringing with them boxes full of Islamic books and Islamic libraries that contain biblical material. because of course the biblical material made it into Africa, because Egypt is attached to Africa, so it's kind of, of course it went that way. So the next question is, what on earth's turning up there? There's boxes and boxes and boxes. One guy managed to rescue, I think it was like 460 odd books, in boxes ahead of a war zone. So they're coming tumbling out as well. And to be honest with you, the cooperation that's taking place now in the scholarly community means that we could get access to that as well. So you've got Tibetan material, you've got Islamic material, you've got more material coming out of the deserts in, Jerusalem, Egypt, all that sort of area, Dead Sea Scrolls. There's tons of it, and what turns up in Egypt itself, because it's a very dry environment. That's where the Nag Hammadi library comes from. That's Egyptian. And they know for a fact there are more burials in that area that are yet to be excavated, and the scrolls, generally speaking, get buried with monks that are buried in those burials. So
Richard jumped over to Rumble, so here we are. I wonder how many or how much they have that was never released for whatever reason or another.
Well, that's a good question, because on the topic of libraries, I was talking to somebody the other day, one of my contacts in the Catholic Church, because I do actually still speak to them. And what they were saying is the problem, this big conspiracy about, the Vatican's got this and the Vatican's got that, and so on and so on and so on. He said there are 3.5 miles of shelving. And their documents over the last 2,000 years in their library run to tens of thousands of documents. And he said the last time he looked, there were only 3 of them working in the library.
Good grief. So he said, there into the next 2 generations.
It would take 3 scholars. He said it would take 10 scholars about 400 years to get through what's down there, And then you'd have another 400 years worth of stuff to go through. The whole idea of Vatican books, it's not a conspiracy. It's just literally a lack of resources. They don't have the scholars at a sufficiently high level who are continuously available to be able to wade through the amount of stuff they've got. It's just, honestly, I've seen pictures of it down there. There's some of it. It's not like the Da Vinci Code. It's not like one of these big aerobic cabinets with loads of nicely organized shelves in, like the one that it shows you in that. Nothing like that at all. It's just rows and rows and rows and rows of shelves full of stuff.
So why not digitize them? Like, why doesn't the Vatican digitize it to the public? You might actually have people come forward, to assist in that crime. Mind you, if there's something you don't want people to see, that might be kind of putting the cart before the horse. So,
the single biggest problem is just the volume. And you've got to say Catholic scholars are not renowned for being quick. The Nag Hammadi library, the Americans managed to translate that in 3.5 years,
Well, now with technology, it might be easier.
It's only in the last couple of years that we've finished doing the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's been about 70 years it's took them to get round to doing that. And like you say, with modern technology, especially with AI, I think AI is going to prove really important in translation. Because not only can you X-ray now, and you can photo image, you can enhance, you can do all sorts of things like that. If they're missing letters and whatnot, you can set something loose on it like an AI bot, and it'll start to fill in the gaps. It'll work out the bits that the naked eye can't see.
But then that would go against the narrative, I think, because let's face it, we've been taught something. It would not I don't think it would be likely that they would want to go in and undo hundreds and hundreds of years or thousands of years of this is this is how it works.
Well, that's
because then you kind of got to admit, we took that from over here or from over here.
That's sort of the inspiration behind the book that I'm producing, because it did dawn on me that you've got the first 1,000 years, the first millennium. Right at the beginning of that, you had the birth of Christianity, the birth of Judaism. You had loads of stuff going on, sort of right the way up to the time the Romans got hold of it, Emperor Constantine and all that. So the first 300 years, the first 3 centuries of the first millennium was really important. But then so were the first 300 years of the next millennium. So you go to the second millennium, you've got the Crusaders, you've got the Templars, you know, the Cathars, you've got all that sort of stuff going on. That, if you like, the first one was like the blossoming of truth up to the Romans, and the next one's almost like the blossoming of error, because that's what we've ended up with. That is, you know, the framework of religion. But lo and behold, here we are at the start of the next millennium. So that raises the important question, what now? Because we've had truth, we've had error. Is it time now for revelation? Is it time to see reality? You know, is it going to be an enlightening like they're saying it's going to be? I mean, I'm saying if I can get my book out in my lifetime, then that'd be fantastic, because that's the first 100 years of the next millennium. So my collection of, you know, documents and scrolls and what have you, that will go into that melting pot, you know, hopefully.
We know there's so much to it that I mean, that you could write a 10-parter or just on that alone. Seriously. I mean, when you start getting into some of the hieroglyphs that were found even in the tomb of King Seti I, you know, where you've got the little helicopters and the UFOs and the grays, and, you know, and then there's this story that came out of Russia in the 70s where an Egyptian, I guess, well, I'll say whistleblower or a guide who was on payroll, allowed Russians access to a tomb. And there's video footage of this because it was just in the 70s. And you have yourself like a tall gray or tall white, mummified, revered, because it was almost like burial rivaled that of a pharaoh.
Well, again,
it's freaking tall butted gray. It's big.
Well, you've got precisely the same story in America. You know, you've got hieroglyphs and Phoenician artifacts and Roman artifacts turning up, early period stuff all over the States.
Can we just talk about the Grand Canyon?
Yeah, and the start of, you know, the whole of the South American cultures, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Olmecs, the Toltecs, so on. Where the hell did they come from? And, you know, why are the pyramids everywhere and stretched heads people everywhere and giants everywhere? And then just to cap it all, they've got hieroglyphs and Phoenician writing in flipping Australia.
Just so, you know, so let's hop over to something else then, because this is another theory which still connects to Egypt. It's the Atlantis connection. Now, I say it's just to Egypt, but not just to Egypt. There's a theory that Atlantis was not one place, that Atlantis was many different places, and there was crisscrossing all over the globe, which is why you find traces of ancient Egyptian stuff here, you know, the Celtic stuff way down over here. You're seeing a crisscross, but of really similar stuff with maybe a different style. Pyramids, for example, built differently, but they're all over the world.
There's a huge, and I mean huge, amount of commonality right across the world when it comes to things that are truly odd. So the stretched heads guys are everywhere. Pyramids are everywhere. The same kind of prehistoric Stone Age technology is everywhere. People who are not supposed to be in certain places turn up everywhere. You know, and then other things start creeping in, like, you know, they find mercury under a pyramid in South America, but they already know that there's a pyramid in China that's got mercury under it, you know. And as soon as you start to join the dots, it's almost like you can draw a line, and everything below that line is common right across the whole planet. And what that's pointing to is some form of maybe not unified, but definitely connected human social structure. But, and as I always say, it's not what you can see and what you can find, it's what you can't see and what you can't find that informs that. Because all the continents were connected up to the impact into the Gulf of Mexico when continental drift started. So what was going on with that? Is that Atlantis? Are the connections there? Is that something to do with the biblical flood? What on earth is happening there? And again, flood stories. I mean, back to, I think I mentioned in the last interview, there are 88 flood stories worldwide that all have the same basic framework. You know, there are things in common. You know, some bloke gets in a boat and saves a load of stuff. You know, it's basically the same story. Well, that's what it is. You know, it's the same story.
You're not wrong. That's true.
But it's on every single continent.
Yes.
It's like everywhere mankind went, that went with them. But then you've got other questions like, what about these guys with the enormous heads? Who were they? What about the Denisovans? What about the Neanderthals? You know, what about Eurasian 1, 2, and 3? All this DNA that's coming up now. Where are all these people? You know, where are the tiny people from Flores Island? Where did the giants go? The Anakim, the Anunnaki, where did they go? Where are all these people? Now, if all of a sudden it was possible to put all of those pieces back together, I think what you'd be looking at, the jigsaw puzzle that would come together, would blow everybody's mind. You know, it would be like you were looking at some kind of advanced sci-fi planet with weird creatures, weird people, weird things going on, you know, strange happenings. What we're left with now, when the dust eventually settles, is like a huge destruction layer. We're sort of picking our way now through the ashes of all that's gone before. And when you start looking at things like that, of course we don't know things. Of course we don't understand what's going on. Of course none of the discoveries fit together. You know, it makes perfect sense. And a lot of the U parts and the fossils and, you know, technologies like the things you find in Egypt and whatnot that just don't fit. They come from that period. They come from that, you know, before that line was drawn period. So Egypt is a great example. I mean, Egypt's just loaded with stuff, absolutely loaded with stuff. I can't even begin. I could do an entire show on U parts in Egypt. You know, how the hell did they drill the holes? How did they move the blocks of stone? You know, it's just crazy. And like you say, some of the depictions of things like light bulbs, tanks, helicopters, you know. But then this is the commonality I'm talking about, because you go to the Bible and you have a look at some of the visions that the prophet Ezekiel had. He saw wheels within wheels. He saw whirling wheels whizzing towards him across the desert. What he's describing is a helicopter. But he was writing about what he could see in the future when he was sat there in 800, 900 BC. So that raises the next question. How the hell did he do that?
There's a depiction of one in the tomb of King Seti. It's like, it's right there.
You see how all these different threads are beginning to tie up. Yeah. So as soon as you drop down this particular rabbit hole, it turns into a vast cavern of information. And what really makes it important is that all the bits that you find there actually all tie in. They all tie together. You know, it's not like nowadays, it's not like people are just making stuff up and it's, you know, dotted all over the place. Oh, we've got the Loch Ness Monster. Oh, you know, it's not kind of individual, you know, geolocated things. They're all over the world. You know, they're everywhere. The Loch Ness Monster has got its counterparts right across the planet, the same as Bigfoot.
Yes. Yes. I'm going to share a screen while you're talking. So.
Okay. And it's the same with everything. It's the same with the technology. It's the same with human beings. And you've got to ask the question, well, why and how? What's the connection? Because there has to be one.
No, exactly.
Some of these things just don't happen by accident. You don't wake up one morning and think, hey, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll just populate the planet with pyramids.
There we go. I mean, there it is right here. And no, you're exactly right. But look at some of these, you have different crafts here. Look, I mean, I don't know. Call me crazy. I've got to come flying in from left field here, okay? All right, you do that. First, my bubble, just saying.
Well, this is archaeology for you. If you actually know your hieroglyphs, right, it is possible that two of the hieroglyphic names of two of the rulers in Egypt, when they are superimposed one on top of another, produce that image.
Which one?
The one you're looking at. So the argument is that in fact it's two sets of hieroglyphs, and what they've done is they've tried to recarve it and not got rid of the previous set of hieroglyphs. They've just carved the new hieroglyphs straight over the top. which is actually, when you actually see it, it does, somewhere out there, it'll be online or whatever. It's a fairly convincing argument that actually that's happened by accident. But I'll tell you what, that is one absolutely incredible accident.
It's definitely, I mean, fascinating when you think about it. So you can get into all kinds of things from time travel or who was here first. I mean,
well, there's absolutely no doubt, and I've got to say this, that people who lived in the BC period drifting into the early AD period, there is absolutely no doubt that somebody somewhere could see the future. How they do it, how they did it, that's open to debate. It could be these guys with the enormous heads that have got some kind of massive cognitive ability, and they've managed to crack the problem of time. Somehow they've managed to be able to see into it. But the mechanisms involved in doing that are beyond our understanding at this present time, or maybe one of the extinct species, cracked that as a problem, and that was their ability. I've been reading a book fairly recently that, for example, the Denisovans seem to be leaning more towards shamanism. They could actually have been a race of people who were, super savant, sort of autistic type creatives that were capable of predicting what was coming, bringing a lot of loose threads and loose ends together. But certainly you find it biblically. I mean, there's lots of prophecies in there, and it's in the Nag Hammadi Library and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's in a lot of other things as well. Tibetan Book of the Dead, Egyptian Book of the Dead. You start reading some of these books, and you're starting to think that some of it looks remarkably modern. There's a lot of stuff in there.
There is a lot of stuff in there, and I think some of it has a way of repeating itself as well. But I've had the great fortune of traveling to different parts of the world, and the similarities that I see all over the place, because I do go to a lot of ancient places. That's where I'm drawn to, so that's why I go there. So like even when I'm in France, I'm in Paris, and I'm hanging out on the island, and I'm staying in the old placa sections, near Notre Dame. I mean, I love the people, but I don't care to stay in Paris itself. It's not me. I only stay in places that are freaking ancient and preferably haunted if possible, but definitely ancient. I want, because I'm empathic and I'm a sensitive, I'm a medium. I want to pick up on that. That's why I want to be there. And there are places that are just amazing, and Egypt was one of those places. My experience was a bit scary at first because I got grabbed right off the airplane, and because I had long white hair, it's like, no, you cannot. No, they covered me up. So don't go like that. We'll never see you again. I was pretty terrified as soon as you get off a plane, but I was treated very, very nicely, and I did get to see some incredible things and experience incredible things. But I find that when you start looking at the similarities of all of these ancient structures, not just the pyramids, which people say that's a mountain. No, it's not a freaking mountain. And when you start looking at satellite imaging and LiDAR, just for starters, you can see what's underneath the tree canopy.
Well, we've actually got a thing over here in North Wales called the GOP. And as an archaeologist, I'm intimately familiar with it. It's only down the road. And it had this huge cairn of stones on the top, like this big, pyramidal thing. Now, I've got to say it's cone-shaped. It's not pyramidal in that sense.
Okay.
But wherever you look at it from, it looks like a pyramid. And everybody was like, yeah, it's got this massive pile of stones on top, and it turns out it's the biggest prehistoric cairn in Europe because it's the biggest pile of stones. But it doesn't stop there. Because where they got the stones from was the rest of the mountain. They shaped the rest of the mountain into a giant cone. And not only did they do it on one side of the River Dee here, they did it on the other side as well. There was another one that faced it across the other side of the river. So as soon as you're approaching this part of the country from the sea, you've got these two enormous white limestone pyramids either side of the entry to the river. Now, unfortunately, one of them's been destroyed by the Edwardian landscapers. They got rid of one. The other one's still there. Now, it's very simple for me. If they can do that down the road here, if in prehistoric times they decided to shape an entire mountain, not just a pile of rocks on top, they can do it anywhere. They can do it in any part of the world, you know.
Mhm.
So why
Mhm.
not? You know, why not have some of these? I mean, they've got them everywhere. They found one recently in Indonesia, you know, one of these pyramidal shaped mountains.
Mm.
And when you look at them, like you say, it's either it's geological and it's one of the biggest crystalline structures that planet Earth can possibly throw up, because you have got to bear in mind you can still get pyramid structures in nature. It's possible. Or, and I'm leaning more in that direction, they're man-made.
Mm.
And it doesn't mean that they have to be built out of piles of stone. They can be the opposite way round, where you've got basically a mountain to start with and they've cut the sides off to create it, which I think is where the geologists get confused, because they're like, well, this is natural. Well, yeah, it's natural inside, but it's not on the outside. You know, and then it's down to the archaeologists to find out why on earth did they do what they did with it. I think it's one in Romania that's very famous now. They've started looking at it, and there's tunnels in there, there's chambers in there.
They also found an ancient library in Romania.
Well, and clearly
another one.
Clearly, it's yeah, they did. Clearly, the pyramids are built for a purpose. There's no doubt about that. Because the one here they've got, we've actually got natural caves. This is a really great story, but it's a sad one as well. We've got natural caves here, and when they went in there in the Victorian times, they found 16 skeletons buried on shelves in the caves, which were very clearly prehistoric. But they all, wait for it, had stretched heads. They all had these enormous skulls, all of them. Now, apparently, and this is documented, the archaeologists got the creepies and chucked all the skulls down a well.
Oh,
so they're gone.
God.
So all we can do is hope that there are more remains, more human remains in there. But that's the famous story of the stretched heads of the goth. So it's that same culture, isn't it? It's that same. They're all over the world. They're everywhere. You know. In fact, I was only reading fairly recently. They found a medieval nobleman, which I think I'm right in saying was 12th century or 13th century, when they had the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral. They started restoring Notre Dame. And as they went down and they went through the floor layers, they found some lead coffins, and one of them was all sealed up. So they cut round the lead and they opened it up. And lo and behold, here's that medieval nobleman with an enormous head, massive stretched head. Now, that's only 700 or 800 years ago. Now I'm going a bit further. I mean, it's only struck me fairly recently, but I'm leaning a bit further. I think somewhere on planet Earth there might just be one of them that's still alive somewhere. Now, I don't know where I'd start to look. Like, for example, maybe the Paracas, South America, maybe somewhere out in the jungle, the Aztecs and the Mayans and what have you. Maybe
somebody like that could blend in more because of the crown binding, you know, skull binding.
Because there's a lot of people wandering around that still have
exactly. So if you had somebody who was natural in there, that they would blend a little better. Maybe that's where you start looking.
It's so tantalizingly recent, you know, that maybe somewhere out there, some of these guys are still walking around, but keeping themselves to themselves because of the experience they've had with, you know, us, Homo sapiens, the problems they've had over the years.
I mean, you know what? I don't doubt any of that, because I always say that the universe has an interesting way of presenting information and so on. Let's face it, we see people, everybody's got a camera phone now. You're on a vacation, you're somewhere, you see things, satellites catch things, you know. But I mean, you have little people showing up in places. There's sightings everywhere. Bigfoot, giants. I mean, just during the Gulf War, just a few short years ago, really, when you think about it, or actually I think it was in Afghanistan, they took down a giant.
Yeah.
And that was a military person on air, I believe, in one of our shows, who basically said, "Oh, this happened. We took one down." And it was just like a handful of years ago. What?
This is, like I said, the world is an enormous place, and really the only way we're going to get any of this is to get boots on the ground, to actually get out there, and somebody find these things and then go public and say, hey, we've got one. This is what it's all about. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's all kinds of information out there, and there's a lot of stuff that's starting to surface. And I think people are opening their minds up a little bit to not such traditional history. I think they're starting to realize that, what, things are not all as they seem, which takes me back a little bit to the mystery schools, because I think primarily we have people who study alchemy, but that's a specialized thing in this day and age.
Yeah.
Back then, alchemy was pretty much run of the mill. Would have been looked at as, you'd be looked at as a heretic per se in some places or by the church, but not to anybody who wasn't the church or God-fearing. This was pretty average in most, civilizations, was it not? And this is a craft that was taught among what else?
Well, it's the old story where for years educationally we've been sold the lie that the people of the past were more primitive than the people of today. But it's just not true, because as an archaeologist I can confidently say at the very worst the people of the past were the same as us. So whatever we're capable of
worst
now, because whatever we're capable of, they were also capable of. At best, and this is it, at best, they were better than us. Much, much better than us, because of things like alchemy and their spirituality, their approach to environmentalism, the materials they used, the experiences they had, all the information they built on. The path that they chose, in many instances, is different from ours. Also, the people they had available, these guys with the big heads and the different species, and the flora and fauna was greater back then. The world was a different place, so they're bound to do a better job than we are because they've got better tools to work with. So even at worst, they're very much the same as us. And if you want to see the similarities, just go and have a look at the Romans, because that's what we are. We are essentially still the Romans. Everything they did, the toilets, the arms and armor, the medicine, the food,
we're
the
still there.
Politics, we're just doing the same thing. In fact, in some cases we're not doing it as well as they did it. It's
cement. Can we talk about cement? The Romans had a technique that could be underwater and it lasts forever. The roads are still in place. Ours, this crumbles away.
Houses rubbish.
We still can't do that.
It's funny you mention cement, because they've just found a building site buried in the ash of, I think it was Pompeii. And in the building site, they've actually excavated it, and it shows you how they did the cement. And it's blown everybody's mind, because when you mix the ingredients together, it's a chemical reaction. So all the cement they were making was chemistry. It wasn't just like, slapping it in there. You mixed it up, you shoved it in, it reacted, it did certain things, and then it became flexible, and it's virtually indestructible. And they've actually found out how they did it now, which is a very recent discovery. It's only in the last couple of years. And that just popped everybody's head. Miles beyond anything that we're capable of doing. Miles beyond.
So primitive, but yet not so much. So is it safe to say, in your opinion, that the mystery schools may have been extraterrestrial in nature? Because, the theory goes back to the god Osiris, who was said to be an extraterrestrial. And had been there since prehistoric times, right? But it came from an advanced ET culture. And of course, it's been theorized that there were a lot of masters who came in who survived the destruction of their continent of Atlantis. But again, that's if we believe it was one continent, or if it ended up being spaced out, which some researchers or, theorists are starting to think it may have been. But a lot of these masters came to early civilization of Egypt, helped to advance that, and the mystery schools were in fact Atlantean knowledge.
Well, you're back to that line again, because we're living above the line.
Yes.
You've got the line, and you've got so much stuff that you can then fill in that jigsaw puzzle. Well, when you move away from the physical objects, because I mean, you've got some great things in there. You've got things like aluminium, that goes back to, the times of the woolly mammoths, and there's all kinds of nonsense that shouldn't be in there. Take aside from that, you've then also got to say what was going on spiritually, what was actually happening, because that's essentially what the mystery schools were founded on. They were founded on some form of either technology, knowledge, or spirituality, or a combination of all of that. And there's definitely things going on that are not the same as things that are going on now, and that don't seem to be able to be traced back to us. And again, sticking with the subject, going back to Moses, one of the best examples is the Ten Commandments. There he is on top of a mountain, all on his own, and some massive, sucking great big alien thing, which he has no idea what it is. He just chooses to label it as God, comes down in a sucking great big cloud and gives him the Ten Commandments and most of the rest of the Mosaic law. Just, there you go, you can have it,
Well, even some texts of, I think the Old Testament tells you that there was a lot more than 10 actual commandments.
Well, there's tons, actually. There's loads of them, and they just appear in all different places. But the point I'm making is it wasn't invented by Moses. And that same process is repeated in all the other major religious forces. So like you've got it happening in Tibet, you've got it happening with the ancient Egyptians, you've definitely got it happening with the Babylonians, the Sumerians. Some of their legends are absolute mind-popping. And you start to find these enlightened masters, people coming from elsewhere. What you need to establish fairly early on, though, is, do you believe that this is a spiritual form of imparting the knowledge, or is it a physical imparting of the knowledge? For example, fairly recently, I think it's 1270 BC, there's an account in Egypt of a pharaoh witnessing flying saucers.
Those are everywhere.
Well, this is one of the oldest accounts that accurately describes and goes into the royal records that some weird physical something or other is happening that resembles what we now regularly, routinely write out as a UFO encounter. And that's in ancient Egypt. But then if that's happening, then other things are happening. So again, it's back to this idea that, well, at least the people in the past were equal to us, if not better than us. So what are they seeing? What are they experiencing? Where is this information coming from? There's no doubt about it whatsoever. When you start doing some kind of spiritual archaeology and you really start digging, then there is definitely something going on there that you can't attribute to us. It's not us. Best one of the lot, and I'll do it in about 10 seconds. I'll do it as fast as I can because I know we're pushed for time. The actual genuine real Hebrew Bible code, if you actually do that, as they've done it at the Shrine of the Book, if you actually do it and you run it properly, forget all the Drosnin Sudoku rubbish, forget all that nonsense, that's just a cover-up. If you run the Bible code, you actually look at what's going on, the actual code itself cannot be reproduced. I will say that again. The actual Bible code cannot be reproduced. You can't do it manually. You can't write out a line of Hebrew that follows the rules that you find in the Old Testament and New Testament and Aramaic scrolls. You can't reproduce it. Nobody can at all. So there, in one example, in one foul swoop, it proves they did not come from us. That information, that whatever it was that ended up being written down, whenever it was written down, that did not come from us. It either came from an extremely advanced form of human being, possibly one of these guys with a big head, supercomputer, whatever, or it came from elsewhere. It came from somewhere else. And that really is what territory you're getting into with the mystery schools. You're getting into things that some of them are better than others. Oh, absolutely. Truth is so much more exciting than fiction. Just came popping up there. Yeah, that's absolutely, that's it. That sums it up, actually. And when you start digging, you will find it's like, how can I put it? There is a level of truth in all of them. some of them are more true than others. And some of them, if you really look at some of the religious systems, they're very clearly designed to throw the initiate off. Sorry, the uninitiated. It throws the uninitiated off. So you've got to be very careful, because there's a lot of rubbish. There's a tremendous amount of baggage in some of them. Some of them have started off right. You know, they've grabbed hold of the ball and started running with it, and then they just go completely off track. And that's happened down the centuries. You know, everything from, you know, all the way back
lost, lost in translation.
I was going to say everything from Mithras right the way through to Aleister Crowley. They're all laying down a smokescreen, because whatever truth is hidden in there is going to stay hidden. You know, that's the mystery part of a mystery school.
Emerald
really,
Tablet.
Exactly. Wherever you go, you know, the more of the books I'm looking at for the book I'm writing now, the more things like the Book of Enoch and what have you, all these other books, there are truths in there, and there are some really nice truths in some of them. They really, you know, make your spirit pop and your mind pop. But then you've just got to wade through so much baggage, you know, so much nonsense and rubbish, and you know, do this, do that, do the other, and you're like, no, I just want to know the truth, you know, which is kind of where I'm going with the new book. I'm kind of trying to, you know, tease out the wood for the trees, you know, trying to get out of it the meaty bits that people would want to know, not the rubbish.
Right.
I'm not going to get specific, because I'm going to start, you know, grumbling and moaning and complaining about specific religions, and you know.
Well, I see, that's the thing too, when you're looking at a belief system, is that every culture, every you know, nationality has their own versions. So over time, how much overlaps and how much just takes you off into different directions. I think when you go back to the roots of everything, I think that you're getting into, to even understand, for example, the mystery schools, you need to understand Egyptian culture. Where was it? Where did it start? And when things changed and did this great leap, you know, where did it come from? What was that big gap, that leap?
Yeah.
That it jumped to all of a sudden it's beyond just a belief system. Now it's a technology. Baghdad battery, you know, there's an example. You know, like the light bulb, the famous light bulb. Like, there's stuff out there, but how do you dig back to that? It's not like you were in the time of Enoch and you could say, all right, let's dissect this book, because you weren't there. It's, you know, that's the understanding. Like my lack of understanding, I suppose, is how do you fish through there and take out the nonsense and keep it? Like, there's a reason it was left out. It does have ET tendencies, only put in a biblical sense of the angel showed me the future in the palm of their hand, or showed me an image in the palm of their hand. To me, that looks like a tablet or something.
What is an ET if it's not an angel?
Right.
Now, that was a really 21st century statement.
Yes, okay.
Obviously, in ufology, now everything's crumbling because they've realized everything overlaps.
Yes, I
Angels,
do believe everything overlaps.
Ghosts, UFOs, little green men, Loch Ness monster, you name it, Bigfoot, you know, these are all interdimensional, and that's a massive blanket that can be thrown across everything. Well, try doing that in time and space, and you'll end up with the same result, because start looking at biblical stuff, you know, God, visions, prophecies, angels, demons, the devil. They're all of that is just old world language for what we are still basically dealing with today. We just have different labels for it. That's all. So yeah, it's a kind of a part of the process of archaeology, where the trick is a big word called contextualization. If you want to understand where something's coming from, you've got to read around it. I have an extremely basic understanding of hieroglyphs. I really wish I could read hieroglyphs, and for that matter, cuneiform, which is the Babylonian stuff, because I'm positive if you could just read the original languages, the truth and the knowledge and the information contained in there would absolutely blow you away. Now, I've gone down the other route. I'm kind of, you know, Greek, Hebrew and Latin. That's kind of standard Bible college stuff. I'm over on that kind of camp. But I really wish I could do some of the older languages. And then again, we have got this problem where there are languages that are still to be translated. Minoan is a great one. I don't even know where to start with that. And some of the languages that have turned up in places like Bulgaria and Romania and even the Soviet Union. Some of the languages are just absolutely incomprehensible because of the way they're done. But that information, it's a case of saying, what was the society like? What were they doing? How were they thinking? What do we already know about them? Like, for example, we already know that in Egyptian, their creation myth starts with water and reeds, a raft of reeds drift to the top of the water, and that becomes the first ground. Now, to my ears, that sounds remarkably similar to Genesis. You start looking at that's basically that, but in a different language. And when you start to look at the significance of this reed raft, it begins to explain how a lot of the religious goings on in Egypt happened, how they built temples, why they all had pools of water and what those pools meant. And you start to get into the psyche. And the more you do it, the more likely you are to arrive at some kind of understanding of that particular culture and where they were coming from.
Terraforming.
Actually, that's kind of it's like divine terraforming, I suppose. The world was without form and void, and then next minute, ta-da, it's covered in water, and that's where the land starts coming in.
Yeah.
But that's a previous cataclysm. I mean, that's I don't think there was one flood. I think there was a number of floods, and that's probably the oldest flood we have any record of. Probably, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of years back for that one. Depending on what time scale. I mean, I was thinking about this today. Time scales are such a pain in the backside because at the end of the day, you can look at historical records and you can work out probably going back to about 8,000, 9,000 BC. So let's draw a line around 10,000. Let's say around 10,000 BC. Okay, there's 10,000 years. We can nail our colours to the mast. Once you get past that, honestly, it's the sky's the limit. Anything's possible because we just don't know. There's a triceratops wandering around in, South America in 34,000 BC at the same time as human beings are walking around. Honestly, it just ends up, the evidence is too flaky and too fragmentary. And then you get people coming in going, hey, geological time scale, let's work out a scale for carbon dating. And then you end up thinking, well, where the hell did that come from? Who made that up? Where did they get that information from?
Well, how do you explain out of place artifacts? How do you explain mines? There's evidence of mining going back like 200 billion years ago. Where did that come from?
Yeah, then all of a sudden somebody, finds a mummified hadrosaur. Hang on a minute. There. Organic, full of DNA and food in its gut, and it's still there. And it's a flipping dinosaur. So somebody somewhere's got something wrong. That's what my gut's telling me. So even now, I mean, I use terms like, 480,000 BC and things like that. But actually, I know full well that the people listening to this are just going to be like, well, that's completely meaningless. I have absolutely no idea how long that is. It's just a long period of time. So I've passed sort of 10,000 to 12,000 BC. I've given up using the time scales because they just don't make sense. They don't. And the evidence doesn't fit. It really doesn't. Like, why the hell is the planet still full of living fossils? There shouldn't be any, coelacanth, horsetails, you name it. Duck-billed platypus, whatever the hell that is. None of that should exist. It should exist, They shouldn't be there, but they're there.
Look at the octopus. They don't even believe that it's actually from here.
No, it looks like, I great theory that the octopus arrived on a meteorite. It's something that came
possible, yes,
from elsewhere. Who knows where the heck it came from? But octopus are great. They're fantastic things. They really are. I just hope they never get around to farming them. I think that's terrible.
Oh, it is. They're just very intelligent. Besides that, so like if we're getting back into, let's talk a bit about the Emerald Tablet. It's a curiosity to me because It's taking us back to the Atlantis-Egypt connection a little bit, because according to legend, Thoth wrote the Emerald Tablet, and this basically how to create the legendary Philosopher's Stone, and records, the history of Amenti, if I'm saying that properly, an underworld beneath Atlantis. So again, there's this connection. We talked about the Great Pyramid, energy center built 17,000 years ago by Thoth, technologies from Atlantis and Lemuria, and now again, Thoth creates the Emerald Tablet. Again, this connection to Atlantis. So, and he's in Egypt. So,
well, you've got to bear in mind Thoth is a blanket term.
Okay.
If you look at the Egyptian version of Thoth, he's a baboon.
Yes.
And he brought writing. That's basically what Thoth is to them.
Scribe.
Yeah, he's a scribe. That's what he is.
Right.
So anything at all, anything that in that period that was to do with writing or whatever was tied back to Thoth.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to cause a problem, because when you start to study that sort of thing, there's not one Thoth. There's Thoths. There's lots of them. They're everywhere, all over the place. So that's your problem, okay? So it's a very, very big, broad, diverse term. If you then want to come the opposite way, I think you hit on it with alchemy. I think it was an alchemist in about 700 or 800 AD that pulled all of this together and created what you're referring to as the Emerald Tablets, which then has been capitalized on by numerous magical people and what have you since, all the way up to Masonic writers today who still refer back to the Emerald Tablet. But again, most people think the Emerald Tablet. Okay, where is it? Nobody's ever produced this thing. I've never seen photographs of it. I've never seen a transcription of it. I've never seen a proper translation. So it's kind of a legend, I think, that has drifted itself into fact. And again, you said it earlier on as well. I tend to put things in date order. This ended up coming before this, which came before this. So, and then I work backwards and go, right, what's the first time that anything actually appears? And it is relatively recent in archaeological terms that this idea of the Emerald Tablet comes forward. I seem to remember it was something to do with the library under the Sphinx and that famous psychic clairvoyant chappie who said it was down there, mentioning no names. But again, that formed a whole community. I think. Yeah, it became a whole society of its own in the 19th and 20th century, and still goes on. So a lot of these things are what I would call modern myths. You have to be very careful of those. I mean, the actual first, person that kept any records of anybody that was dead, who I would have thought would have written the tablet, would have been Anubis. Anubis was the recorder of those who died, who passed over, and Anubis, I mean, no doubt about it whatsoever. Nobody has the foggiest idea what the hell he is. They call him a jackal, but he looks like he's some kind of extinct desert dog. And more importantly than anything else, whatever that type of extinct desert dog was, he is the prototype for Satan, for Lucifer, for the devil. That's what Anubis is. He's the bad guy.
One of the underworld is what he was.
Yeah, he's the bad guy in Egyptian mythology, absolutely. So really, that's where you ought to be looking for, I think, for the origins of a lot of that side of it. I think it's, not sure about, a tablet writing baboon. That doesn't quite work for me.
It's huge. It's huge. I mean,
it is. Yeah,
they do look at it as the mysteries of the Emerald Tablet. It's a big one. People are very enamored with it.
I am tremendously aware that modern writers have jumped on it. I mean, the other one's the Book of Enoch as well. They all kind of jump on the Book of Enoch, and that becomes part of the same kind of mythology.
I think basically because it has a little bit of futurism in it.
Well, it does, but we don't have any surviving early copies of the Book of Enoch. I think it's only sort of 400 or 500 AD onwards. Theoretically, it should be earlier. It should be Old Testament Apocrypha. But I think I'm right in saying that the only actual surviving written versions of it are relatively late. Once you get past Constantine the Great, once you get past sort of the mid 300 AD, once you get into like 400 AD, 500 AD, 600 AD, there's a whole block of stuff in that time period that just comes from nowhere. People are at the point of making it up almost. So you've got to be very careful with that. I'm not saying that's what's happened with the Book of Enoch, but we'd certainly, as a scholar, I think a lot of scholars would like to see an earlier version of that.
Maybe in private libraries. We talked about this a little bit too, like public libraries, if they have it, they're not talking. And anything that sits in some of the private libraries of
and if you had to dig a copy of the Book of Enoch up with a monk that was buried in the 1st or 2nd century, would you actually tell anybody? That's what would you do with that? And how long would it take for that to get translated?
Well, sure. I mean, we don't know. There's so many old families out there, noble families who have immense libraries. It may not even have thought in their head, what is this old thing hanging around? Like they don't really think about it. It's just something that has sat through the families, especially when you get into, just take England, for example. Some of these big houses get passed down generation after generation. They sit in the same family for hundreds of years, and others get taken over by the country itself because families can't afford to maintain them or pay taxes. So therefore, everything inside, 9 times out of 10, either they purchase it or it's left to the Commonwealth, and everything just sits.
I did hear fairly recently that somebody was cataloguing one of these gigantic old libraries, which, like you say, they just sit there on shelves in cabinets gathering dust. Nobody ever gets them down and reads them. Well, apparently,
you don't even know it's there.
They were cataloguing one of these, and they actually opened a book and discovered that the lining on the inside of this book was a lost part of one of the Arthurian cycles from the medieval period. They got half a book of Arthur written out in small print, and somebody just used it as a book binding. So that's almost the same story for Gawain and the Green Knight. There was a library in Oxford that burnt down in the 1700s. One of the books that was rescued out of the library turned out to be Gawain and the Green Knight.
How many situations has that happened in?
Loads.
All of these. You look at the ancient library of Alexandria that burned down and sacked, and like a lot of things went missing. Anybody who came into port, and anywhere near that library, everything was pulled, everything was copied, everything was returned. Napoleon, actually, it was believed that he did the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
He copied a lot of the information, and but there's a belief that he may also have been a Templar. And there was information.
Here's one that will pop your head. I love this because
I like head popping. Let's do it.
I only worked this out the other day. Okay, let's assume, because it seems to be right, that Jesus was born in about, by our calendar reckoning, he was born in about 6.5 BC, because that's when you've got the Bethlehem star and all that happening, and the Chinese worked that out. If he was born in 6.5 BC and then they fled into Egypt when he was 3 years old, that means they fled into Egypt somewhere round about 3 BC. At which point, the Library of Alexandria is at its height.
Okay.
All of a sudden, you start going, wow. So, Jesus of Nazareth is stuck there. He's bored. He's got sod all else to do. And he's got a whopping great big library that hasn't been destroyed or sacked or burnt or broken up. It's sat there in Alexandria that hasn't sunk into the ocean yet at this point. It's all still there, the port of Alexandria, with this socking great big library sat in it. Now, this is what happens when you start looking at chronology, when you start adding the dates.
And you realize it's actually still there. And it would make sense because it's believed that Napoleon, I think it just goes back to a lot of stuff with the B symbol and connection anyway. So apparently he was said to have raided the Vatican archives, brought many of these archives back to France, recopied them, and then returned all the originals. So this is something that he did. And I tend to wonder if he did that because of maybe information that he might have found when he was in Egypt. He would have gone. If that library in Alexandria was still there, Napoleon was there, and he had an interest for this, did he have an interest because he saw this and went, oh, wow, like all of this knowledge.
Well, the last time the Alexandrian Library was actually functioning was probably when the Romans invaded. So you're in the AD period.
Right.
But by the time you reach Constantine,
1700s, yeah,
you're sort of, 100, 200, 300, 400. By 400 AD, it's gone.
Okay,
And
so it wasn't there in his time.
no, he couldn't have. He might have been given manuscripts, books, and scrolls
From
that
there.
have survived.
Right.
But the last
The Vatican had a lot of them.
And the last people in Egypt that could speak or read hieroglyphs died out in the 500 AD period. So anything that was in there that was written in hieroglyphs wouldn't have been readable anyway.
But in hieroglyphs, you had other people coming in through trade from different countries, and their scrolls were taken into the Library of Alexandria, copied.
Yeah, but were they copied in the original language, or were they copied in
this
Greek
is true.
or
Yes.
Latin or hieroglyphs?
But it would have showed they would have had to have known the language to be able to copy them even in hieroglyphs. So you obviously, if that's the case, you're dealing with some pretty big scholars. Otherwise, they were literally just being copied and then waited to be interpreted.
Well, what's also equally fascinating, I only found this out recently, is because the first 300 years of the existence of, quote, the church out in Egypt. So you've got a lot of the early church fathers, and monks out in the desert and all this kind of palaver going on. Well, 100, 200, 300 AD, that library's still there. So I'm not just talking about Jesus going to the library and having a quick nosy. I'm talking about, the first 300 years of the foundation of what we regard as the church overlaps the existence of the library at Alexandria. Now, why doesn't anybody ever say that? That's absolutely mind-boggling what might have been available. It also helps to explain where a lot of this material is coming from. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, all the lost books, the Old Testament Apocrypha, the New Testament Apocrypha, all of that stuff, right the way up to Constantine the Great at the beginning of the 300 AD period, all of that material is influenced or possibly could have come from or may have been referenced to the library at Alexandria because it was still there. Which again, Alexandria, that is on the North African Mediterranean coast. Back to where I started this when I said they're pulling entire libraries now out of North Africa. Now, if I saw, the armies of the Islamic world suddenly deciding to come and destroy the library at Alexandria, I'd do exactly the same thing. I'd chuck as much stuff into boxes as I possibly could and go in the opposite direction, which puts you into Africa, puts you into North Africa. So I am 100% certain there is stuff out there from that library that has survived, no doubt whatsoever. I mean, we've not gone off the topic either because we are very much talking Egypt at this point.
Mysteries, yeah.
We're just talking more recent. We're not. I mean, when I say ancient Egypt, I mean Cleopatra and all that stuff. That's
Egypt.
Roman.
Yeah,
it's still Egypt. It's Roman. She was the last of the Ptolemies.
That's right.
So again, all the Roman garrisons, the Roman rule, the Roman population, all that stuff that we think of as just being, it's only Roman, still had the library at Alexandria. 100 AD, 200 AD, 300 AD, 400 AD, 500 AD. Rome doesn't collapse to the invasion of the Goths till you're in the 500s. So the Romans had it as well. Next question. I'd love to know what's in those carbonized scrolls that they brought out of Pompeii. They found an entire library of carbonized scrolls. One of them, and they've only been looking at one of them, looks like, I think it's one of the lost Greek plays of Euripides. That's Library at Alexandria material. That's what that is. 79 AD. They're only across the Mediterranean from the library. It's only a couple of days, 3 days sailing. Come out of Italy.
I went from Greece to Egypt in a few hours. Yeah.
Well,
so it might have been longer, but you're close enough. Like you're close.
This is what happens when you tie up all these loose ends. When all the dots start to join up, you begin to think, hang on a minute. When things are compartmentalized, it's easy to lose track of what's going on, which I think is part of the cover-up, if you like, has been done that way in the past. But now we're joining the dots. Now we're bringing all this together.
And it just, I know, it just leaves you with so many more questions. I think it's one of those topics that there's always been a fascination with the ancient world, especially ancient Egypt. And I think it's just because it's been put out there more in films and things, because it's just, I mean, the pharaohs and the opulence, and there was just so much to that draws us there. And then as you go along, when you look at these monuments, people look at these and they're like, who built these? Why are they there? They're still standing, which is a testament to their technology. And then people say, well, where is this technology? And where, there is still so much that we don't know, and we may never know in our lifetime. But the fact I think we can say is that there's definitely something that is, I like to say, the origins are from out of this world somewhere, because you can scan the entire globe and see so many similarities in culture, architecture, technology. There's something to that. Whether we want to admit it or not, whether it goes against the narrative, whether whatever the case may be, I think there's a lot of answers yet to be found. I think there's, I agree with you. Scrolls, I believe that they would have been taken all over the world. You had things surfacing, and I think we again thank the Victorian era for that, because a lot of that information did get put all over the world. Yes. Much with artifacts and it's not just Egyptian mummies that went. I mean, there's artifacts from all different parts of the world showing up everywhere.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. I think the key to what you're saying really is where we're living in sort of above the line, to use yes. the terminology of the interview.
Yes.
When you get below the line, the question is, what out of all of that material is, as it were, divine intervention, with emphasis on the fact that means it's coming from somewhere else. Mm-hmm. How much of that could we have done, and how much of that did we not do? What came in from elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And there is just that tantalizing amount of material that says that we're not entirely responsible for everything. Every so often there's a flicker, and like a window opens. And like you say, technology is a great reflection of that. I mean, I've stood on that enormous obelisk in the quarries at Aswan. I couldn't tell you how the hell to move that. I haven't got the foggiest idea. And this block's even bigger than that at Baalbek. There's some huge blocks out there. That is something that is way beyond anything that is currently known. It's that window flickering open. And I think every spiritual path, from the Inuits up and the Eskimos up in the Arctic Circle, all the way to the Aborigines in Australia, there's information that has come in that is regarded as divine that doesn't seem to have come from us. And I don't think anybody in any path anywhere who's studied anything would argue with that. There's always going to be the next thing that's bigger than us. The thing that's really important, though, is what is bigger than all of us, what is bigger than everything. Now, whatever label, whether it's 21st century labels like aliens, extraterrestrials, interdimensional beings, or whether it's ancient labels like, angels, demons, Anunnaki, whatever. Whatever the labels are being used, it's the same question. That's what it is. It's essentially the same question. What is there that doesn't come from us?
Everything.
And enter the theme tune for Ancient Aliens.
I know.
I'm waiting for Giorgio to come on at this point and go, well, it's got to be the aliens.
Yeah, it's got to be aliens. I don't know. I mean,
He's not that bad, honestly.
I think we're the new kids on the block in comparison to and we're not the first kick at the can here. I say it all the time. So there have been other cultures. There may have been, we've had beings that live, on the planet. I mean, you get into the whole hollow earth theory. That's a whole other show. But we don't know. We haven't explored it all. We're too busy wanting to explore what's out there, and not taking the time to explore what's already here. So what are we missing?
There's 2 radio shows in that. Is there genuinely an out there? Can we genuinely go out there?
I know.
Did we ever go to the moon? Go and check that one out. I'm sure I've got an interview out there somewhere. And the other question,
we've done that one. Yeah,
and the other question, of course, is you've got Babylonian kings that are living 38,000 years
right.
each, or 27,000 years. That's their lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
That's how long they live. Well, imagine what they can do. Imagine what they're capable of.
It's a whole, again, we could just keep going, Mark. We could just keep going. We could keep adding this.
That's what I'm saying. These little tiny, every so often the window flicks open and it's like, whoa, we're seriously missing something here. It's one of those moments, honestly. Don't get me started on the Babylonian king lists. We'll be here forever. I think there were 9. I think I'm right in saying there were 9 kings, and the 9 kings between them ruled for a period of 38,000 years. And I think it was the oldest king lived 27,000 of those years.
Yeah.
So you're talking now about eternal
Sumerian kings list is the one you're talking about.
The Sumerians have it.
Yeah.
Old Testament ages are notoriously enormous. Adam and Eve potentially could have lived forever. If they hadn't eaten of that tree, if they'd have eaten the tree of eternal life. Well, the question is, who did? Who did eat of the tree of eternal life? And how did they find out it was the tree of eternal life if they didn't eat from it? Well, it might not have been them. It might not have been Homo sapiens, but it could have been somebody else. So you can never rule any of this out, no matter where you go. Moses and Egypt and what he wrote in Genesis, you're still on topic. He must have got that information out of an old temple somewhere in Egypt. Solon, Plato's granddad, met one of the priests in one of these temples, and the priest said, "Hey, you Greeks think you're so clever with your 7,000-8,000 year old history. We've got scrolls here that are 12,500 years old." Really?
That the games begin.
And that was the Greeks. You're talking about Greek period history there. So you're only about 600, 700, 800 BC. It's just, and the more you dig, the more you find.
Well, I think the answers to everything obviously are spread out throughout the world. Some hidden in plain sight, some not so much. Some yet to be discovered. Some probably in private collections and will never be made privy to it until the family decides, this is, or the collector, this is something that we will share with the world because.
Or it could be in hieroglyphs on a tomb wall somewhere that hasn't been dug up yet.
Exactly, 100%. Well, it's been a slice, let me tell you.
It always is.
It always is. It always is. And oh my gosh. So this is a part of the show, of course, where you tell everybody how to find you. What do you have coming up? What are you doing? The
Here we go. I know the routine. Okay. As you know, I'm really simple when it comes to things like this. If you want to find any of the books I've written, there are 9 of them. They're all on Amazon. Just go and buy them off Amazon. Yes, I know Amazon take an inordinately a large amount of money off me, but don't worry about that. You'll get the book. It'll come winging through your door 3 days later. So don't worry about it. They're there. And despite anybody saying that the first 3 books are out of print, they're not. The actual publishers, Turnip Valley Books, have still got them in stock, so don't worry about that. They're all out there, all 9 of them. So go and find me on Amazon. There might be, if you're lucky, a few copies of the DVDs I've released as well, knocking around out there, as I've recently discovered. So you could probably find some back issues. I mean, the UFO one keeps turning up, Europe's Roswell, things like that. So have a good search and see what you can find. Number 2, if you want to come and talk to me, come and find me on Facebook, because that's the only place you can find me. Facebook, and then you can work with me on Messenger. You can communicate through that method. Yeah, I know it's what old farts do nowadays. I've been on there for like 25 years. But, all these modern things, I don't have silly smartphones and I don't have 30 different formats that I communicate. Facebook, come find me on Facebook. But make sure you're a real person, okay? Because I can tell. Trust me, I can tell.
It's an act now.
I've been on there so long, I can know if you really know. And then the third thing is, if you really want to laugh and you really want to get stuck in and find out loads and loads of interesting things, go on YouTube. Type me into YouTube, because all the back catalogue went up last year. So all the TV series, Lost Treasures, all the extras, all the documentaries I've produced, all that material. Don't take no for an answer. It's out there. It's on YouTube. So that, in a nutshell, that's the 3 things. So you go for Amazon, Facebook, or YouTube. Couldn't be any simpler. Projects coming up. Well, I'm writing this biblical monstrosity of a book. Just the research quotes, okay, have gone past 30,000 words. So you're looking at another thing the size of the Arthur book. It's going to be quite a big one, but it'll be worth waiting for, because I started putting it together in 1978. So it's going to be a long time coming. But it's not an easy topic. It's not an easy subject. So, and you know what's going to happen? It's going to happen like King Arthur, isn't it? I'm going to put the book out and everyone's going to jump on it and start tearing it to bits and, you know, all the rest of it. In fact, it happened the other day. I don't know why I'm telling you this now, but somebody came up to me the other day and they were going through I've got a promo copy that I take out on talks, and he was going through and I thought, I know what you're up to. And he went to the back of the book and he went, there's no appendix. You've not listed all your sources. And I went, au contraire. I said, the entire of chapter 5 is just the sources. And he flicked back into the book like that. You could see him going, put the book down and kind of shuffled off. Because like, if I do put something out, trust me, I'll belt and braces it. You'll know where everything's coming from. So I'm working on that. I might be doing a bit of an autobiography, because I've started writing some notes of where I've been and what I've done. Tonight's been a little bit like that with the Tales of Egypt and stuff.
Yes.
And then I might just go off and do another one. I might do a follow up to Revealing the Green Man, Revealing the Clay Goddess. I need to finish that. There's a couple of others in the pipeline as well. So, but yeah, that's coming. But the 9 that are out are all on Amazon anyway. Go and check that out.
I love that. And you are back on with us. Let me just get the dates, because you are back on with us on December 19th. And we are going to be talking about the stories from your series, Lost Treasures.
Well, that's an exclusive. I've never done that before. I've got lots and lots of interesting stories. It was a very diverse series. So anybody that's thinking, actually, it's a good plug that, because anyone that's thinking of tuning in for that interview, all 22 episodes plus 6 extras are all on YouTube. So go and check that out. And then you'll know what we're talking about, you see.
And I'm going to do it the same way for everybody on Rumble and YouTube who follow and subscribe are going to be able to get a head start to participate in the show. I know we're sitting, like I'm watching right now, we're sitting with like 90 views on Rumble. We just got some shy people that aren't used to our style of being able to just put up some comments and questions. So remember that, you guys, every Wednesday and Thursday night, 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern time is when the shows typically go live, and you'll be able to participate in the chat like you've been seeing here today. Today is a special edition because it is technically a pre-record of the show that will go, which recording will go live this evening. So there won't be a chat room. So with that being said, we have to sign off. So big thank you to my friend and special guest, Mark Olly. It's always such a pleasure hanging out, and wealth of information. Just, I'll leave here after that, say, damn it, should have went down this direction, should have did this, should have asked this, but we'll just have to do it again. So
come back and do a part 3 next year. Why not?
I agree. Keep it going.
It's a huge subject. It's a huge subject.
It really is. And things just keep coming up as we have our parlay over here. So anyway, big thank you to Folgers Coffee for sponsoring our show. We're so grateful to you. Thank you so much. Next week, guys. Okay, Wednesday night, Morgan Knudsen returns, and she'll be talking about different haunted locations, especially here in Canada. She's a fellow researcher, Canadian fellow researcher, and she's just delightful and a lot of fun. Thursday, we welcome the return of Dr. Rita Louise, who's going to be discussing her book, Dark Angel, An Insider's Guide to Ghosts, Spirits, and Attached Entities, all keeping in tune with, of course, Spooky Month. So, guys, thank you. We appreciate you. And I'll be in the chat room this evening. So drop in out and have yourself a terrific weekend. Good night.